Hey, what's up, family? As I always say, hope you're having a good day. If not, just know that the worst is behind you. Tomorrow has been yet to be created, or manifest. Just know that your thoughts, the things that you say to yourself, that you think, was what creates your experience around you. You know, there's obviously some things we can't control, but there are a lot of things that we can control, and that's our perception of reality and what we're experiencing, especially what it's meant to teach you. So definitely having that experience myself, and this is probably maybe be a little bit longer video. Definitely could be a lot of emotions tied into kind of what I wanted to talk about today, just because it's a reflection day for myself and a reflection point, especially during my journey. As you can see, I'm in my favorite place, walking around. It just actually finished raining, which is a nice symbolism as far as what I'm experiencing, what I'll be talking about today. So, you definitely got to love how Spirit and the Divine, sets the stage for various things that we experience. So, I'm not everybody likes rain or rainy days, but I'm somebody that definitely loves rainy days, loves rain, just because, he always looked at it as from a standpoint of washing away impurities, of washing away, quote unquote, I don't want to say the bad things, but just washing away, the grime, the muck, the things that have been clogging up systems. Flowers always grow, with enough water. And so definitely, and just after the rain, it just seems like a sense of renewal. Things are coming alive because they've received that fresh dose of water, that it may have potentially needed in that moment to finish that last leg of growth that was needed. And just as I'm saying that, I'm having the realization myself that, again, is symbolic for exactly what I'm going through right now. And as anything, I'm someone who am just looking to share, my life experiences as I go through, my awakening process and, my ascension process, and just talking to others and just kind of be that guide for anyone who my messages potentially may resonate with and have either gone through similar experiences, that they can find some resonance in the message, to see how far they've come, and that they aren't the only one that's alone and that had to go through similar situations. And then for those who have yet to go through those situations or currently living through those situations, to once again know that you're not alone, and maybe offer some ideas or just be that example of someone who has done the work to overcome those situations, to fully step into their power, into further alignment with their purpose and their path. So the reason I say all of that is I've spoken before in previous videos, how I had, it ended a 15 plus year relationship. And so, even with ending that relationship, just in title, pretty much it was been in title only. So, we still remained friends, still remained cordial, still hung out with each other from time to time. And basically I guess it was a way to, on the surface, say that you weren't in the relationship, or I wasn't in the relationship anymore. But when I zoom out and kind of look at the interactions, for the most part, we were texting every day. And even when I didn't text, it still took on the appearance of, she would get upset, because I wasn't texting or being in a place to where wanting to know my whereabouts, my comings and goings. just as if we were in a relationship. And especially when we were around each other, there's certain ways that she would act towards me. I would make comments that, hey, technically we're supposed to be, friends. We're supposed to be on that kind of level, that was agreed upon by both of us. We had spent so much time together over the years that we really knew each other. And I guess, looking back on it, it was only natural for her to feel that way, just because I heard I don't say a joke, but as you always get on YouTube, you see these various shorts and stuff, and I saw a short one day that said, women can't cheat like men can, because men abide by the rules that are set by the woman that they're engaging with, whereas women, don't abide by the rules set by the man, because they get involved in the situation with their heart. And once they get attached and that heart gets involved and comes with the emotions, that all things are out the window from that standpoint. So I'm only mentioning that because of that analogy. Not that there was any type of, quote unquote infidelity going on, but should have known from the standpoint that because there were, emotions that were there just from that 15 plus year relationship that we had, that there was no way possible that we would ever really be friends, despite, the words that were coming out of her mouth and that she was saying. Obviously I could keep it, at a friend level, but it was clear that just the certain actions and the things that she would do when we were around each other, that despite the words that she was saying in her heart, she saw us as basically a couple just living apart in different areas. So the other night, let me rewind. So basically, even after the fact, even going through that scenario of being friends and being cordial to one another, when we were around each other, she would still say certain things, and I just didn't feel the connection in my heart like I used to. There would be time that would pass by and we wouldn't see each other, and then she would hit me up and ask if she could come down, and hang out at my apartment, and I would oblige, because it is nice, to have company from time to time. And so basically I started to notice that whenever she would come down and she would walk through the door, of course she would be excited to see me, and give me a hug and etc. So, but whenever I would see her, that warm and fuzzy feeling, wasn't there. It wasn't present like it had been in the past. And it was something, that I talked to my therapist about in regards to the connection and stuff. So, like I said, it was part of my conversations just about being a people pleaser and just breaking from that. And part of being a people pleaser is having that codependent feeling towards other people, because I didn't have that love, or that deep love, or even just love in general for myself, that I was looking towards other people in order to get that love, that sense, that feeling of love. So it goes back to some of the things I've talked about before, being willing to accept anything from a person for the most part, because of the little bit of love, or just to get the little bit of love that they would show you. So I noticed that even after all the changes that I've made, all the shadow work and stuff that I had done to try and improve myself, make myself a better man, there was things that I was still hanging on in the relationship just because of the feelings that I would get from it, the sense of companionship, but it just didn't fulfill me. But then again, just being the person that was willing, still that little bit of me that was willing to accept certain things, I would say not from other people, but I would say definitely from her, that, type of treatment, because I did like, like I said, that sense of companionship, just having somebody there that you can kind of talk to, after work or throughout the day, especially when you're kind of having a rough day, and just having that outlet with someone to talk to. So But like I said, there were just little things here and there that got me to realize of what pieces of myself I was still allowing to be siphoned off or to give away just for the sense of that companionship that I felt like needed to be closed or needed to be recognized in that moment in order for me to really complete a cycle and really come into my power, so to speak. So the other day, actually one of the last videos that I made when I came out here, I made the video, went home and got something to eat and was sitting on the couch watching a little bit of TV, as I was eating, and she had texted me, asking me if I had got back home safe, if I had got back home, not necessarily safe, but just, asking me, are you back home? And, in that moment, I was tired. Maybe I should have texted back in that particular moment, but then again, I'm thinking to myself, hey, I understand somebody being concerned that you get home safe, but it was almost like, gave me that relationship vibes to where what somebody would do, if you're in a relationship, because she texted me and asked me if I was home, and I didn't answer right away, and then all of a sudden she started blowing my phone up, calling me, and, because I didn't answer in the moment just because it was, I was just tired. Like I said, I was just getting the vibe from it of being in a relationship with someone that technically I'm not in a relationship with. This is supposed to be a friendship and stuff. So after I finished eating, I picked up the phone and basically responded that, yeah, I was home, things are fine. And she just texted back saying, well, I don't like your vibe, your vibe is off, your energy is off. So, you have a good night. I'll talk to you later. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm just like, dang, is it because I didn't hop right up and respond in that split second moment to let her know that I was home? And it just got me thinking that, basically we're not even in a relationship. It gets back to that theme I was saying earlier where we're not in a relationship, but she was still carrying things as if we were in the relationship. So, and I had felt for the past couple weeks, if not the past couple months, that because of that scenario, because of that situation, that, I needed to go ahead and just put an end to things, permanently, so to speak. But here again, I was afraid of hurting her feelings and making her feel some kind of way, caring more about her emotions, more about her feelings than I did my own. I was still basically hanging on, waiting for something to pop up that would kind of give me an exit, to exit out of it, so to speak. And so, I remember, which is obviously not the right move, you're, as a man, even as a woman, if you're in a relationship that you don't want to be in, or a friendship that you don't want to be in, you should be able to stand up and speak your truth, regardless of how, it potentially will make someone feel. Obviously, there's a right and wrong way of how to speak your truth, because especially in situations where emotions are involved, there's going to be quote unquote fireworks potentially, depending upon how emotionally mature, both parties are. So I admit that I should have went ahead and spoke up and said something, but like I said, it's that little piece of myself that I admit and see that I needed to work on and needed to finish healing, so to speak, so that way I could step into my true, authentic self. So, one of the things that I've come to learn, just by watching others that have kind of been on the journey, so to speak, learning from them, is that, our spirit team, the angels, the divine, our ancestors, our spirit guides, they can't directly intervene into our lives unless we give them permission. We have free will to be able to make decisions. They can send us signs, they can send us, I would say messages, just put things in our path to kind of give us hints of which direction we should go, but they can't actively cause things to happen unless we give them permission. So because of that, and by knowing that on certain occasions, if there's things going on in my life that, I feel like I need assistance with or I need help with, I will basically, as part of my meditation or a part of my prayer, I will say, hey, angels, divine angels, ancestors, spirit guides, I give you permission to actively, I don't want to say interfere because it's not interference, but I give you permission to actively come into my life and make way for the next steps that I need to take. So, and as the saying goes, kind of be careful what you ask for, because they definitely, and it's because of the love that they have for you, they will definitely show up and show out for you in that essence to ensure that what needs to be done, especially if you're not doing it, they will cause it to happen, in my personal opinion. So that way it kind of takes the ball out of your hand. It triggers a scenario or situation that needs to happen in order so you can make the progression that's needed in that moment. So I say that because that's what I did in the scenario when me and my father basically, kind of separated. Is always look at it from the standpoint that because of divine angels, ancestors, they can see others' hearts. They can see the thoughts that they have, and they know the thoughts that people have towards you, to whereas we can't. We can only see what's external to us. That if we're having a situation, they can see that certain people don't belong in our lives, and they will keep showing us those red flags as a way of showing us that these people don't belong in our lives, hoping that we will take heed to those red flags and make the needed decision in order to remove those people from our lives. But if it's in the case of like my dad, I felt like that's what was being shown to me, is because just because people are your blood family doesn't mean that they're your soul family. There are certain individuals, as they say, that are karmic to us, and they're in our lives to teach us lessons, to help us understand certain things about ourselves. So that way, kind of think of it as like a mirror. There are certain people in our lives to act as a mirror to us, to show us parts of ourselves that we can't see. So that way, in the hopes that we see that, and once we see that and we identify with it, then we know what part of ourselves needs to be healed. So, and I definitely feel like, my father is very much karmic to me from that standpoint. While he has many good qualities, there's obviously some negative qualities, because we all, have them. And it doesn't mean that we have to embody them, so to speak. It's just those qualities that we need to take a look at and to work on, do the shadow work. So that way, we can either integrate those lessons into our lives and understand those scenarios. So that way, when opportunities present themselves that the old version of ourselves or the pre-integrated versions of ourselves may have stepped into, the part of ourselves now that has integrated those lessons can now avoid, because we're, mentally aware and have a strengthened discernment to identify those scenarios where we may have went left when we should have went right. So that way, whenever we receive those, tests from the divine, from the universe, to see if we've truly learned our lesson, we can lean on that discernment to know which way we're supposed to go. So that way we can step further on our path and step into our next lesson that we need to integrate. So said all that to say that basically, that was something that, my opinion. Oh, and when I said that about my father just having that prayer, I didn't say it specifically about him. I said a prayer basically for my spirit team, that anybody that doesn't need to be in my life or isn't supposed to be a part of my life, that I give them free reign to basically come into my life and move things around as needed. And so that's when the next time, shortly thereafter, had a conversation with my dad, and I put that boundary down that I spoke about in one of my previous videos about someone being associated with the family that didn't treat my parents with respect, that they were always calling me to ask me to help this person. I stated that I wasn't going to help this individual, and I was putting a boundary down. And so when I said that, it triggered my father to the point to where he accused me of doing things that I didn't even do. I did, like I said, I do dabble in tarot cards. So I did post kind of like a mini tarot card spread that I did on my Facebook page. But for whatever reason, when he saw it, for whatever reason, in his mind, he saw it as a Ouija board. And so because of his, religious background, I don't mess with the Ouija boards. I don't have a need to, as I stated before. But in my opinion, looking back on it, I feel like that was my spirit team, the divine angels and ancestors answering that call for them to become active participants in my life as it relates to people, removing people that shouldn't be there, because in essence, the spirit team, divine angels, ancestors know that because of the love that I have for my father and the connection that was there, that would be a hard connection for me to remove from my life. So what better way to remove someone from your life than to have them remove themselves from your life, without you having to make the decision, or you have to lifting the finger. So my opinion, my interpretation of that scenario was that, the spirit team realized that my father was somebody that didn't need to be in my life, at least at that particular moment in time. So they caused him to see something that wasn't even true, that didn't even exist. So that way he would remove himself from my life. So I'm saying that because that's the same thing that I did with my current, friendship / partnership, with my ex, is that because of the feelings I was having and the way things were going, and just not having those warm and fuzzies, and knowing that it was a connection that I really didn't want to be in, I said a prayer to my spirit guys and to the spirit team, just saying, hey, I give you free reign to help show me what's true here, and help clear the path if that's what's needed, so I can move forward. And so, as I said before, definitely be careful what you ask for, because in my opinion, that whole situation was orchestrated, by the spirit team. I'm sure she probably thought that because I wasn't responding and what was going on, that because we lived, 2 to 3 hours apart, that I was potentially doing something, I was out doing something that I shouldn't be doing. It was obviously probably being with somebody, or, doing something that I didn't feel comfortable answering the phone or responding to her message. So, like I said, all I was doing, I had some Buffalo Wild Wings left over that I got from the previous night. And so I was just sitting on the couch, watching the tarot card reading, and, all of that went on. And lo and behold, she took that action, which is pretty much in alignment with everything. And one of the reasons why, I wanted to move away from her first, because of the lack of emotional intelligence that she displayed, throughout our entire relationship. Obviously I wasn't perfect, but at a certain point, I started making steps to make the needed changes in my life to become a better person. And she even recognized that, because one of the things that she would tell me is that my family, we didn't grow up saying sorry. I'm sorry whenever we did things that hurt other people. It was very much so a situation where we would brush things under the rug and just keep pushing, as if it didn't happen, and not even acknowledge it, so to speak. So, and that's the mentality that I carried throughout my life, throughout my relationships. So, when she mentioned that to me, it was something that I already knew about myself. But the difference was, is I actively made changes to start saying I'm sorry. So when situations came up that I normally wouldn't say I'm sorry for, I started saying I'm sorry and apologizing, and she, even so much so that she would make a comment how she really admired how anytime she would say something to me about something that she didn't like about my behavior, about who I am, so to speak, I would make active changes to change that scenario, change that situation, because it cared to me that she felt comfortable enough to express to me things that she didn't like me not saying I'm sorry. And it was because I cared about her. I know that I wouldn't want somebody to continue doing things to me or in my relationship that I expressed or I communicated that I didn't like. So because she expressed those things and communicated those things to me, I cared enough about her that I would want to I made those changes. And that was one thing I noticed, that it was, a one-way street. I never made excuses of saying, well, hey, baby steps, you got to take baby steps, or I'm a work in progress, so to speak. And it was like every time I brought certain things up, that's the response that I would always get, is that I'm a work in progress, and understand that, maybe I'm just the type of person that can put that work in and have the ability to put that immediate work in to make changes, whereas maybe other people aren't. So, I took that in stride. But when I look back on it now, I look at it from the standpoint, if you truly care about somebody, the saying goes, actions speak louder than words. So, I just started to realize that over time, when I would communicate these things to her, it basically became like a broken record. I would say, because to me in a relationship, communication is I'm very big on communication. I guess that's no surprise with me being an air sign, especially I'm Aquarius Mercury, and just communicating, especially with me having a Scorpio moon, I'm all about the emotions, the emotional side of things. So, but I just noticed that whenever I would say certain things to her, she was definitely, her nickname prior to meeting me and stuff, was Firecracker, so if that kind of gives you any idea about her personality. But one thing I did notice, and other people noticed, is that whenever she started, dating me back in the beginning, her friends noticed a change in her to where she no longer really embodied that energy like she usually did. But I would say definitely, if I, just like the other night, whenever she thought the situation, something was going on, she definitely still has that energy and she will bring it out. So, had the situation been reversed, because there have been plenty of times to where she's quote unquote done things that I could raise a side eye to, but because I knew in my mind, we're not in that kind of dynamic, that there's no need for me to get worked up. She is out, meeting someone or doing certain things, that's fine with me, because obviously, we can't keep playing this song and dance if we're not going to be together, keeping it cordial, keeping it friends. I mean, she's really close to my grandmother, so obviously there'll be some connection there just because of the family side of things. But as far as relationship, there's no there, so to speak. So, but saying all that to say, in my opinion, with me asking, my spirit team, the divine angels, ancestors, giving them permission to actively interfere in my life, I don't want to say interfere, I hate using that word, but just becoming active in my life to help me get onto the path that I need to truly be on. That in my mind, that just like they caused my dad to see something that wasn't real, that wasn't there, that caused him to react a certain way to me, that he actively removed himself from my life, they did the exact same thing to her, to where just by me being delayed by answering, a message, caused her to feel some kind of way, even though we're not in a relationship, to where she actively removed herself from my life. And so, the next day, I did have a work meeting that was only about an hour and a half away from where she lived at. So I do what they call sneaker botting, to where I'll use bots to buy sneakers for me so that way I can resell. And there's a storage unit that I have that's right around the corner from her house that I had a couple pairs of shoes to go to that I needed to go pick them up. They had been sitting there for about a week or so. And so, on the way up there, I kept telling myself, oh, I'm not going to message her. I'm not going to message her. So I went up there, and because of her being a kind of a firecracker and whatnot, I was like, okay, look, I'm just going to let her know that I came up here, got the shoes, because I would imagine at some point it would come out in the conversation anyways, and then that would just bring that side of her out. So I was like, let me just message her and just let her know that I came up here to get the shoes, and just hope that she had a good day and kind of keep it cordial, So she replied back, just kind of straightforward, okay, happy, likewise for you, or whatever it is, and just kind of kept it pushing. And so today, I just kind of looked at and just thought about the connection. And I was just like, man, you know what? My heart's not in it. Obviously the divine has created this situation to where, we're obviously not talking anymore because of the attitude she has towards me. So why not just go ahead and end things? So, be it right or wrong, I just went ahead and just blocked her, her number and the house number, on my personal cell phone and everything. So that way, I still have some things at the house there, but I've always looked at trying to go get those things or wanting to go get those things, but whenever we would connect, it never seemed to really work out. So I saw that as being a tie to keep me bound, or tied to her, to where it's just like something came over me that just said, basically, forget that stuff. She can do with it whatever she wants. So, there's some expensive, like t-shirt printing equipment and various other items there that she can sell and get some money for. So, the divine has blessed me with so much up until this point. So, if those things are really meant to be in my life, the divine will bless me with the abundance needed to purchase those things again, and so much abundance that buying those things again won't even break the bank, at all. So, I'm of the opinion now that whatever's left there, she can have it, she can give it away, donate it, and do whatever it is that she wants to with it. So at this point, I'm done with the scenario. I'm done trying to talk to someone to get them to try and communicate, like a emotionally intelligent person, and not someone who's, I don't want to say a child, but basically just somebody that just has the emotional intelligence to be able to communicate. So in that situation, had it been reversed, I would have sent the messages, and then I would have just let it be what it is, So, never know what the other person is doing on the other side. Just like me, I wasn't doing anything except for eating. So clearly, once I finished eating or doing whatever I was doing, I messaged back like any logical human being would have done. And so it's just something about that whole scenario just rubbed me the wrong way, and it just gave me flashbacks of why I made the decision I did in the first place. So in my mind, it was just easier just to go ahead and just utilize that situation as a springboard, just to go ahead and end things and stuff. So just definitely anybody that's going through similar situations, if the divine is showing you signs, go ahead and take the initiative to do what needs to be done, and definitely understand, how those situations can be in our minds difficult to do, just because we've become so comfortable, in those relationships, especially if you're someone that's not used to getting love from the external world or from the external people, and you don't have that love within yourself. I can understand how that can be one of the most difficult things in the world. The first time that, or when I first ended things, It was so much so to a point to where, I went to my office at work and slept on the hard concrete floor, just because I wanted to get away so bad. There were certain things that happened in our relationship to where, not to say that I'm a perfect individual, but, she's had stolen money from me. There was a situation to where for a long time, because of various things that were happening, I didn't feel sexually attracted to her. So I basically, we didn't have, interactions, intercourse for the longest period of time. And so, there was a period to where I still remember it vividly in my mind, but, in essence, she took sexual advantage of me. And that was one of the things that I struggled with, because I was always thinking to myself, if you say that you love yourself, you truly love yourself, how can you stay with somebody that, that's but that did sexually violate you and stuff, how can you truly say, sorry, I'm trying to cross this reed curve here, so, how can you say that you truly love yourself if you're willing to stay with somebody that did something like that to you? And whenever we did break up, I did mention those things to her, that, how I felt. And that's been my whole thing, is just during this whole entire time I've communicated to her how I felt, especially whenever she made it clear that she wanted to get back together. I told her, that I didn't feel those warm and fuzzies when it came to her. I don't know if it's because maybe I'm depressed and I need to talk to a therapist, that I wasn't going to be able to give her, what she wanted until I sorted out myself. I was always clear and upfront with her during those scenarios, so that way there was no ambiguity, there was no confusion as far as what was going on. So, I've always, because I am so big on communication, I was always expressing myself as far as how I feel. And all I wanted was just the respect of someone to do exactly that to me as well. Just be open and honest and communicate with me no matter how good or how bad it is. Because during that period of time, I can't remember exactly if it came before or afterwards. I want to say it came afterwards, but, when I was in my unhealed state, I was unfaithful, to her once, and as hard as it was for me to say something to her about it, I did mention that to her and tell her, about it, so to speak, when we were going through and having our conversation as far as breaking up. So as hard as that was, so I heard someone over in the woods. It's actually starting to rain now, so, but basically during, I guess because of this emotional release, is the universe responding, as far as walking through this portal, this emotional portal. It wasn't easy for me to express that to her. I can imagine how it made her feel, but even with that, we made it through that situation, and she's always been this big person of, she doesn't do quote unquote cheating, which I can definitely understand it. But it was like that didn't matter to her. She was like, oh, we can get past it, and just kind of brushed it off. So that should have been something that kind of set off a red flag, because, I've always kind of had feelings that, she wasn't always honest about that time period in our life either, whenever we weren't being intimate with one another. So that's neither here nor there. The ultimate underlying thing is definitely, if you're going through a similar situation and you're finding it hard to do what's needed to be done, and I don't even want to say hard, but you see, in your heart what you want to do, don't be afraid to petition, the divine angels and ancestors in prayer, and ask them to, assist you in the decisions that need to be made, so that way you can become fully align with your path. So, because they definitely will respond in kind, and like I said, just definitely be prepared for what comes next. Because you may think you know what needs to happen, but it could be something that you didn't even expect or didn't even think of, but just know that whatever it is, it's intended to happen to get you into alignment with the person that you want to be, and that you probably prayed to them before to ask you to give you guidance in order to step into that power, step into authenticity. So definitely is a somber moment. So like I said, you don't go that long being with somebody without having some type of emotional connection to them. So I do find myself thinking about her, and just certain times. But that's one thing too I'm learning, is just because you're feeling certain energies and stuff, especially if you're a very impacted person, doesn't mean that that's necessarily your energy. So what I do, especially if I am doing something and then all of a sudden I get these thoughts or emotions out of left field, I just give it to the divine and just recognize first that this isn't my energy. This is energy, that this isn't my energy, and that it's with love that I give it to the divine to transmute into something positive. And I always notice that shortly thereafter I say that, I feel lighter, and that energy is now gone or removed from me. And that's one thing too I would encourage, that's helped me, that I would encourage you to do, especially if you find yourself, having these thoughts or emotions that you don't know where they're coming from, or you don't feel like you know where they're coming from. It's just giving it to the divine with love, so that way they can be transmuted. Because as you continue to go through your journey, especially as other people see you elevating and becoming a person that they no longer recognize, unfortunately, people will project onto you, and it's easy to take that energy on and to think that it's yours. But just know that in a lot of cases, and that's what I'm learning myself, is that it's not, my energy, and as long as I give it to the divine and ask him to transmute it, or I'm just using a hymn in the vernacular is because that's what resonates with me. I always call them divine pops, so not saying that the divine is a he nor she, it's just whatever you relate to yourself. But I just ask the divine to transmute that energy, and that's the important part, is just transmuting it into something positive and not carrying that energy thinking that it's yours, because in a lot of cases, chances are it's not. So, but just hang in there, family. If anything, I hope, this story, me process of me talking about it is the way that I transmute, these energies, especially as I walk through, the woods here. It's just thinking and reflecting on things, carry my little stone. So I can't remember off the top, what this one is, but I'll have to put it in the description of what it is, because it's one that, anytime I do any kind of emotional work, I always, definitely carry it with me as a way to be able to express emotionally, the feelings that I may not feel comfortable expressing at that given moment in time, as well as being able to process them. So, but at the end of the day, just know that I love you. You're not the only one that's going through scenarios. Hope me being vulnerable and sharing with you, this particular scenario helps give you some strength to know that any relationship that you're in and you don't feel connected to it, especially if you feel like you're being taken advantage of by the other person, that it's okay for you to walk away from it, because the divine knows your heart. He knows who you are. And at the core, your core essence, there's someone that he has out there that's he's also working on, or also putting in the work like you're putting in, to become a better person, a better soul having this human experience, and that he will divinely guide you to that individual once you've completed doing your healing work, because you don't want to come in union with someone that's meant for you and you're still carrying that baggage to where you inadvertently wind up damaging the connection. So, because that's my thing right now, is I know that I have a divine counterpart that's out there that's coming towards me, but I want to have done the work so that way I don't sabotage that union. Because when I come together, I know that there will still be healing work that will need to be done, potentially together. But that's where, me learning how to have boundaries, me speaking my mind, walking in confidence, and knowing how to communicate that whoever that individual is, once they come into my realm of existence, that basically they will have those same qualities, and there's nothing that we won't be able to go through and accomplish together. So just keep doing the work. Like I said, just hopefully this moment of vulnerability for me, kind of talking, reflecting on my scenario, can help out. So, and two, one of the things that I should have known is that before she came into my life, I had just come out of I had moved from a previous location, and basically I used to live in Indiana, and I moved from Indiana to DC area, and I was alone. I just came out of a divorce for the past couple of years, and I was lonely. And I remember looking in the mirror one night, just kind of in that wounded energy, and I said, I'm not proud of it, but, I said, and what I now know is I was doing, mirror magic, but especially in that wounded state, I didn't know how amplified it was as I do more research now. But, I said, in the mirror, to the devil, this is before, basically I had a bunch of animosity towards the divine because of the religious upbringing and the things that I experienced as part of, my previous religion that I was in. That instead of asking the divine, I asked the devil. I was like, basically, I'll, serve you if you send me a partner. I'm tired of being alone. I want to be with someone. Please just send me somebody. And lo and behold, the very next day when I went to work, because my ex, she actually worked with me, and that was my last day the next day, and she came up to me and told me how she had a crush on me. Me being a shy person, I didn't say anything. I was just basically like, oh, that's nice, and went about my business. And pretty much after that interaction, she pretty much kind of tracked me down until she, we started talking and got connected to one another. So that's why I say be careful what you ask for. So, because, damn sure did the devil send me somebody. And that's another thing. It sounds bad. And like I said, I'm definitely not proud of that moment. I prayed for forgiveness to the divine for that interaction. And I know that he's forgiven me just because of how he's moving in my life now. So, but I look at it from the standpoint, it's just like a parent. You're asking for something, and depending upon who they are, divine is so wise, so intelligent, and knows us that by me asking that was still a part of my path, but it created an opportunity for him to bring someone into my life to teach me a lesson. Just, a lesson that I would have learned going any other path, but it was just more intense, I would say, just going this route because of the energy that I was vibrating at that given moment, and the person that he brought into my life, the energy that they were vibrating in, we were a match, and it was just somebody that was sent there, by the divine, not by the devil, because that's a whole nother conversation when you start talking about the divine and the devil and that energy, and you actually start to realize that, they're part of the same sphere, so to speak. It's all energy, but that's neither here nor there. But it was basically just something to teach me a lesson, to help me elevate and ascend. And that's another reason too, that I've always thought in the back of my mind, with me still being connected to her, it's like I'm still connected to that energy, to that original wish, and never know what energies, attachments that she has on her that their mission is to ensure that I stay connected and I stay at this level and I don't ascend to my true purpose, my true calling. So that's another thing, like I said, just be careful what you ask for, because you definitely will get it. It can be a positive and it quote unquote can be a negative, but just know that all roads lead back to your path, so to speak. You just need to, pick up the map and just recognize what cycles you're repeating and overcome those cycles, so that way you don't stay on a wayward path, but you get back on your divine path. And that's what I'm on a mission right now to do. So I thank you for all things. Every day I wake up, I tell the divine how I'm thankful, I'm grateful for my life. I'm grateful for every breath of spirit that I draw into my body. And I'm grateful for every experience, although this path has its ups and downs, it has its emotional moments, because we are in an emotional realm, that I'm grateful for all of those moments, because it teaches me how to be a better person, a better human being, a better soul. Because like I said, my ultimate goal is to become the best man possible, the best individual that God created me to be. Because when I come into union, with my divine counterpart and we create a family, I don't want to imprint those soul lessons that I have yet to learn, or that I'm carrying from previous generations, previous ancestors. Because I heard something the other day that even though our ancestors aren't here, especially the ones that came before or had passed on before we came into existence, their blood still resides in us. So we're still carrying those traumas, those lessons that they carried. So, and it really became apparent to me when I did this thing called a Zyto scan, where as Dr. Box, perception reframing, to where in essence they play frequencies and you speak about certain individuals even if you don't know about them, and it detects the frequency in your voice, and it can actually pinpoint what, on like a 12-point scale I believe it is. It's been a little bit since I did it, but it pinpoints the various parts of where the trauma is where the trauma is within your ancestors. So when I did it, a lot of my ancestor trauma was tied to congruent beliefs versus conflicting beliefs. And so it was amazing as I went through and did, my mom and dad, even went past them. I did my mom's mom and my mom's dad, and my dad's mom and my dad's dad. I didn't know my dad's father, my grandpa, because he had passed by the time I came into existence. But it was just amazing that how much of all of them shared the same, same challenges, those conflicting beliefs tied with congruent beliefs. So just know that, keep doing the work. I know I don't want to go back to a whole nother tangent, a whole nother path, so to speak. So like I said, that'll be a conversation for another day. And this is definitely a long video because now I've pretty much walked this whole entire path. So, but just want to say, keep doing the work. You're an amazing human being. You're an amazing individual. The divine sees all the struggles that you've been through, the ups and downs, and he sees what you're doing that other people aren't able to do or other people aren't doing. And he just wants to let you know that he loves you and he appreciates you putting in that work to become a better human being. Because when we all do that, the more of us that does it, the higher the vibration becomes that we inject into this world. We become those examples of others who are going through life's up and downs that we potentially resonate with and can help them. So with that, I just would thank you for your time. Thank you for kind of going on this journey with me. I hope something that I've said has definitely been able to help you, on your journey. So just know, like I said, just be careful what you ask for, but know that whatever you get, it's meant to teach you something. It's there to be a mirror reflection to you of something that resides within yourself, that you just need to sit back and observe and figure out what it takes in order to correct. I don't want to say correct as if something's wrong, but just something to work on, to integrate into yourself, so that way you become an even better version of yourself, if not only for yourself, but also for those individuals that are in your life. Because trust and believe, once you start doing that work, you'll be surprised at the person that you become and the person that you morph into. I always like the analogy of a butterfly. A butterfly goes through a molting process in order to turn into that beautiful butterfly. And I would say that's definitely been the process of myself, is that going through that molting process right now of becoming that butterfly. So, see, I've made it back to the car. So, but just want to say thank you, family. Keep doing the work that it takes to become that butterfly, because it is worth it. It is very worth it. So, I love you. I love you. I love you, family. Just know that there's others out there like you that are going through, their own initiations, their own life stories, their own events in life. And just know that you're never alone, that you've got, a brother or sister, in faith that is here to help you get through those time periods. All you got to do is just reach out. So, love you, family. Have a good day. It's going to get better because it already is. I love you. I love you. I love you. Have a good day. Ashe.